This past week, I was up in my office, and I was going through some, we all, in many professions, or if you personally read, you collect a lot of books over the years, right? And some you want to keep, and some you find are not so important anymore, and you push them away. Well, this past week, as I was doing that, probably should have been doing something more important, I came upon a text that I was given and written in the year 1973 by Carl Menninger, a psychologist. And if you're from the Midwest, most people know the Menninger name because at one time they were doctors and they were psychologists. There was a huge huge institution in Topeka, Kansas, that the Menninger family ran. They had a foundation to take care of it, and it was really one of the early pushes towards holistic healing because they cared for people with spiritual questions, mental issues, and physical problems as well, and people came from across the country. And it was so popular, they really were one of the early adopters of universal health care. They tried to provide free care for everybody in the city of Topeka. Well, as the cost of doing that rose with the times, they could not continue, and that ended. But Carl Menninger, Dr. Carl Menninger, a psychologist, probably one of the best known in that whole crew. He's the one who authored the book I happened to pull off the shelf, and that book was entitled, and have you ever heard a slogan, an ad, just do it, right? Yeah, it just conjures up all kinds of things. I pulled that book off the shelf, and the title caught me once again. The title was, Whatever Happened to Sin? Whatever happened to sin? Really kind of rattled me at the moment because, whether certainly in a lot of church traditions, we don't use that word as much as we once did. We talk about bad behavior or other things, but we don't use that word. And I wondered to myself, what did happen to it? Did it just go out of style? Some ways, maybe. Did we solve the problem and we don't need to think about it anymore? It's a word that had its day but doesn't anymore. Were we absolved? Or is it something, a subject, a broader subject, that is irrelevant to our times because humanity has risen above and evolved beyond it? After all, we are pretty sophisticated, well-educated. We have a lot of databases and facts, so we can handle most anything. So we've probably gone beyond such a guilt-ridden, superstitious notion that for many people, the church has held over them like a bludgeon or guillotine. Right? Sin. Why? Why do we need it? There's nothing wrong with me. Well, don't ask my wife, but, There's nothing wrong with me. I'm a good person. I don't kick the dog. I haven't shot anybody. I hope I don't abuse people in any way. If you ask me, sin, the problem and the application of that word, I'll tell you where it should be, on all those other people. The problems we have, it can be narrowed down to our leaders, our society, those teachers, what they teach in school, that's sinful. But me? No. Has nothing to do with me. Which is what Menninger's book title challenged me to think about and to reflect on, to take seriously, and maybe you too. Webster's dictionary tells us or defines sin as a transgression of the laws of God, a failure to realize in our conduct, character, and moral ideals and live them out as fully as possible, and the failure to do as we should toward others. Seems pretty clear, except if you remove that mention of the divine from the equation, then who sets the ideals? Who makes the goals? Who or to whom or to what or to nothing do we measure ourselves or take responsibility or hold accountability? You know, if God's removed, then where are the ideals that we aspire to, seek to live up to? Does the definition of sin have any teeth anymore or relevance if that one is removed? Now, I realize that, many claim belief in a higher or supreme being. That's not unusual right now. I watch the statistics and I read the polls. But the supreme being or the divine uppity-up that they really are thinking about is not one to whom they are accountable or responsible or necessarily grateful. That being they describe in conversation is often a benign something who always loves me no matter what I do. The mantra of the culture is, I'll do my thing and God will do God's thing, and God's thing is to forgive me whatever I do. And off we go. Of course, there are oppositional perspectives on this, and those who confront this notion of God as the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. They confess this, but at the other extreme, as always seeing God as a heavenly judge, sitting over the universe, watching everything I do, judge and jury, who notes the little errors in my daily existence. But when these people push that view on the other people who have diluted it a lot, it only serves to push them farther and farther apart. It doesn't bring any sense of unity, and therefore I do not see it answering Meninger's book title, is where whatever happened to sin, and does it have any significance or application to us today? I don't know. There's an old Jewish story. Rabbi Hillel, told the story of heaven before, what Christians named as the fall, or the story of God kicking the devil out of heaven. Anyway, the parable that the rabbi tells is that one day, when everything's good, the devil says to God, "Let me sit on your throne, just for a minute. Let me try it. What's it like to be there? What's it like to look down at everything and know everything about everyone and all that? I'd like to see that." And God said, "No, I don't think that's a good idea." "Oh, come on, I'm not going to hurt anything. I can do that, I'm not going to take advantage of it. I just want to feel it." God says no. But the parable goes on, and, like the widow that pleads their case before the judge in Jesus' parable, the devil continues until God finally relents and, in a sense of benevolence, says, "Okay, for a minute, you can sit here," and that's it, for a minute. And so God stepped down, and the devil stepped up and sat down on the throne and never got up again. Now, I share that old Jewish parable because it seems to me in so many ways these days, humanity has been striving to sit on that throne. Now, I'm not saying the devil or anything of that, but that desire for power, that desire for having it our way, that desire for no one else being able to tell us what we can or can't do, and we will be the judge of right or wrong. Has been growing over the centuries. You know, the great gift of the United States, our nation, is the power and the acknowledgement that we give to individuals. I mean, that is the great gift. That was the struggle between the average person whose entire being depended on the monarch in the throne, and the rise of everything from the ability to vote, to express yourself, and so forth. That's a great gift. But the outcome of that, because people, individuals, have more power than we've had at any time in history. You know, when one person can bring down a whole nation vis-a-vis an internet, or what they put out there and it spreads like wildfire, that is a lot of power. Power with very little accountability, right? So the great gift and the American experience was to believe in everyone, and that individualism was a wonderful thing. But the flip side of that is the dangerous side, where I think we are, is that it's an idolatry in some sense, is that we have named ourselves the God who sits on the throne, and the rest of you just better tag along. Individualism, when not thought about or placed in a context of family or community, where I acknowledge and celebrate what I can do, what I can say, what I can be, but it has its limits because I need to allow you to do the same, fairly, honestly, always keeping in mind that we live together. That none of us, you know that old saying, when somebody gets too bossy and they look at you and say, who died and made you God? Right? You ever heard that, you know? And yet, in so many ways, you know, and bear with me if I feel like I'm struggling, but I think back to the story in Genesis of the Tower of Babel. Remember, where they were building up and up and up and up till they could be on the level of God. In many ways, all the wonders we have allowed us and pushed us to do that, but we have lost sight of how that gift of each of us can become a definition of sin when recklessly and thoughtlessly or selfishly understood. Do you remember, you know, as Jesus looked out over Jerusalem and wept, I think we have to put it in a context that he didn't say that the way we may take it, in the sense that in the Jewish tradition, I is not a realistic way of looking at life. It's all we. Everybody sees themselves in the context of the family, the community, the tradition, even the nation. The I is a part of the we, just as drops of water are a part of the ocean. And especially in the Hebrew Scriptures or the Old Testament, everything goes well in our families, in our nation, in our culture, when we are working towards the same goals and recognize that connectedness. But when it breaks down is when we seek our own way above all others. It still goes on. But when Jesus wept for Jerusalem, he was also weeping for himself. He was weeping that his time had not made the difference he thought it might. He was weeping that there were so many people living in conditions that could be different. I think he was weeping that the Romans who ruled really didn't care about the people they ruled. And so he wept. Remember, this is the man who said the greatest commandment is that we love one another, right? And by doing that, we show our love for God. So, sin is not so much about, in my mind, or what I offer to you, sin is not so much about what we do wrong, but what we allow to go on that we know is wrong. Sin is not about this or that act of mine, but accepting it, evaluating it, and then working very hard to do better. Not for my sake alone, but for our sake, because if I'm doing that and you're doing that, we don't have to worry about all those other things outside our control. It will seep out and it will grow like ripples on a lake. It just will, just as the opposite can do. Do you remember Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan? A man gets robbed, he gets beaten, he gets thrown on the deck, and two people walk by. And as they walk by on the other side of the road, they get out their cell phones to take pictures of what has happened. Now, they did not initiate the problem, but I'll bet anything they would say they never contributed or participated. You see what I'm saying? It's a we thing. I always wonder when I see those, guys beaten and laying there or falling in front of a train and people are taking pictures of it. Doesn't anybody think to reach out, maybe lend a hand? Oh no, that's their stupidity. Or it's the city's stupidity in putting the tracks too close to the rail. I don't know. I just don't get it. And I feel out of touch often. You see, the greatest gift, I would say these days, that we face is our greatest gift. The greatest gift is also our greatest sin. And that is the elevation of ourselves to the point of idolatry, elevating ourselves to thinking we have the ultimate authority, insight, truth on everything, putting us in a position of judging who's in and who's out, who's right and who's wrong, anybody except ourselves. You see, the people who walked by the beaten man in the Good Samaritan, they were as complicit as the one who beat him up. Today's the big game, is it not? Kansas City fans. I like Patrick Mahomes, by the way. I think he's very exciting to watch. And personally, I've never been a Tom Brady fan, even though he is very good. But you know what you don't hear all week? You have all the hype about such people as those. And you never hear much about those people who are in the foxholes and in the deep, all the grit, protecting him, helping him, making things happen. They get no accolades. And when they seek them, they are usually sold to another team. I think we're kind of that way. We don't want to be just the part of the team and make things work, make things better. We want to be the general manager, and if not, we want to be the superstar player. Never lasts. And so, what is the sin? The sin is not always, the definition of sin is just self-examination. Looking at who I am, where I am in light of what I would like to be, to maintain that ideal, to believe that we are accountable to one another, if not God. to acknowledge, as the Apostle Paul did in his letters to the Corinthian church. He said, none of us are so smart. In fact, God has chosen the ones who the world says aren't very smart to show how powerful God is. For the truth, Paul says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So, when people ask me about others or start talking about others and saying, don't you hate that? Don't you disagree with that? Isn't that a bad way to act? I often reply by saying, once I've overcome all my bad acts, then maybe I can point a finger at them. Didn't your mama teach you that when you point at somebody, you got one finger pointing that way and 4 fingers pointing back? It's a pretty basic lesson, is it not? When I overcome my mistakes, my errors, my ugliness, my sins, because there's always hope, then maybe I have the right to do that. But until then, all have fallen short of the glory of God, and we all need to acknowledge that or stay stuck where we are. That's my hope, given the mood of these days. And I pray that I'm not alone. Amen.